Well, let's see. Got some folks hopping in. Hey, everybody, welcome to a Memorial Day webinar. We're so stoked that you're choosing to be with us right now. I did my best to get home through some Memorial Day traffic, but you got me in the car. So we also have Vic Johnson and Kate Aroldi here. And Kate, did I just say your last name right?
Close. It's Iroldi. You just pretend like
Iroldi.
the A is not there. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, great. And we are excited. Vic's going to present to you all on fueling for Big Mountain Days. And then we'll open up for a Q&A for this month's section of our sins and see what she can answer on common injuries and prevention. And then to wrap up, we'll then move into a detailed look at the Goat Rocks stage, which is a really incredible trip. So I'll let Kate and Vic go ahead and introduce themselves here, and we'll get moving right along.
Cool. Vic, why don't you go for it?
Okay, sounds good. Well, thanks for that, Trent. So my name is Vic Johnson. I'm currently in Utah. That's where I'm from. My wife and I have kind of been bouncing around to some different places over the last few months, but this is where we're at right now. But I am a nutrition coach for outdoor athletes. So I work primarily with trail and ultra runners, cyclists, triathletes, climbers, skiers, people who play in the outdoors. That's kind of my thing. I myself am an outdoor athlete. I love trail and ultra running. I've done quite a few races. I have done mountain biking and cyclocross at a high level, triathlons as well. And the whole reason why I got into nutrition in the first place is because once I started caring about that, I realized how awesome it made me feel and how much it helped with my performance. And so that's why I do what I do. I love helping other athletes get that feeling too. And kind of when everything clicks and just meshes together with your nutrition and your training and all of that, it feels so good. And so that's a little bit about me. I'm currently pursuing a master's degree in public health nutrition. So I will be an RD, a registered dietitian at the end of this program. So I have about a year left in that program. But I have also worked a lot. That's through Northern Arizona University. And I've worked a lot with the collegiate athletes there. So the cross country team, which they've won nationals like 3 or 4 years in a row. They're really good down there. The swim team, the tennis team, and then the volleyball team are kind of some of the teams that I've been working with down there. So yeah, that's a little bit about me. I'll take it away, Kate.
Thanks, Vic. Yeah, that's it's super exciting to have you here. I know I'm excited to learn a lot more about fueling for performance for sure. So if some of you have joined us on the webinar before, both Trent and myself are kind of old faces on the webinar by now. But if you're new, I am Kate, and I'm the person behind the training plan that some of you may be following along with this year. And my background is similar to Vic's in that I've moved through a number of endurance and outdoor sports, and kind of the longer the better is generally my philosophy. So yeah, I'm right there with a lot of you guys. I love going long. And I also have gone back to school recently and am working on a master's in sport performance, exercise physiology, and delving a little bit into bioenergetics, which is kind of more in your ballpark, Vic, with energy usage. But so that's kind of my background. same as kind of a lot of folks, I have been through the gamut of training and done quite a few races over the span of my athletic career thus far. And yeah, I'm just excited to be here and learn a bit. So I'll pass it back over to you, Vic.
Okay, awesome. And Trent, on time-wise, how much time do we have?
Yeah, so we plan for about a half hour for,
Okay.
for you to go into here, Vic. And while Vic is speaking, if anybody has questions, there's a Q&A button down at your bottom bar, on your bottom bar. And if you open that up and type your question in there, then we will do our best to integrate any questions you have. And if we can't get to them, then our apologies. You want to take it away, Vic?
Sounds great. So I'm going to share my screen. Let's see. Present here. Okay. All right. So I've already introduced myself quite a bit, but I really hope that what you take away tonight will actually be applicable. I know there's so much to learn about nutrition, and what we're focusing on tonight is really just the surface. But I really, that's one of the main things I try and do with the clients that I work with, is try and make things really applicable for them. So things they can take away in bite-sized chunks and start applying to their workouts and start applying to their everyday lives as far as their nutrition and fueling goes. So I hope that we can do that tonight. All right, so let me, okay, clicks is how I get to the next one. All right, so I want to start with a quick story. So when I was racing cross-country mountain biking, there was this course at this ski resort called Sundance, and really steep uphills, really big climbs during this race. And I was powering up one of the climbs, and I remember I was in top 5, so I was up in a good position, and all of a sudden my chain breaks, it snaps, and I hear this big snap, and it comes flying off my bike, and I obviously can't pedal anymore because my whole drivetrain is messed up. And I'm like, oh, dang it, there goes the race. So needless to say, I didn't finish that race. I had to do the walk of shame back to the finish, which is never fun. But it got me thinking about this analogy that as endurance athletes, you're trying to put so many things together, and there's so many things that mesh together to make you a better performing athlete, right? You need your training plan dialed in. You know, that's what Kate's here for. She's helping you do that, right? You need sleep dialed in. You need other stress in your life. You need to be able to manage that. You need strength training. You need rolling. You need yoga. You need all of these things to be a really high performing athlete. And that's apart from the other aspects of your life, your parenting or your family obligations or your job, all of those things. And nutrition is one of these things that often gets kind of pushed. It gets pushed to the back burner. And so many athletes struggle getting to that point where nutrition is in the flow of all of that, because there's already so much they're paying attention to. So I want you to think about that. Is nutrition one of these things? Is nutrition and fueling a missing link for you? And if so, how can you remedy that? And how could your performance improve? So here's some reasons why athletes should care about performance. First of all, overall health. An athlete needs to be a healthy human before they can be a high-performing athlete, right? And we all know nutrition plays a role in that. Performance. If you're not fueling well, you're not going to have the energy that you need to perform well, and that's going to suffer. Recovery and injury prevention. We'll get more into these in detail here, but this is a huge one. If you're injured all the time, or if your recovery sucks and you're not recovering in between training sessions or in between runs, or whatever it is you're doing, then your performance is going to plateau or even go downhill, and you're going to find that you're not performing as well as you would like. So with sports nutrition and fueling as an athlete, there's kind of two main sides to the picture. One of these is everyday diet. So what are you eating? Breakfast, lunches, and dinners. Making sure that's a nutrient dense diet. Are you eating enough overall to fuel the calories that you're burning, replenish yourself? And then there's this more sports nutrition side of things, the actual, what are you eating before and during and after your exercise sessions to make your performance be the best that it can possibly be. And that's what we're going to focus on more tonight. I mean, we could go into detail on all of these things, but this is kind of where we're going to hang out on this performance nutrition side of things. So I hope that you guys can walk away from this with a few main things. I want you to be able to know what to eat before your workout, what to eat during your workout, what to eat after your workout. We're going to get a little bit into the difference of fueling with fat versus fueling with carbs. We're going to talk about how to avoid stomach issues during runs, during long pushes in the mountain, long days in the mountains. We're going to talk about what is bonking and how to avoid it, and then talk a little bit about recovery, like I mentioned earlier, recovery nutrition and why it's so important. So let's jump right in. Let's go to pre-exercise fueling. So it's important first to understand that there is kind of two ways that your body can get energy, right? You can get energy from fuel that is already stored in your body. So on this left side, you see there's glycogen, which is essentially carbohydrate that's stored in your muscles. Same thing in your liver. There's some blood glucose, so blood sugar, and then there's adipose tissue, which is fat that's stored. So your body can break down all of those and use those as fuel during a workout. And then there's exogenous fuel, which is fuel that you're taking in that your body can also use as energy. And we'll talk more about that later. But it's important to understand these two sources. So essentially what you're trying to do with pre-workout fueling is make sure that you have this endogenous fuel that's already stored. You hear about people talking about carb loading, right? And you'll eat pasta is like the classic, right? Like eat pasta, run faster, right? That's what everyone says. And that it's true. Basically what you're doing is you're storing those carbohydrates as glycogen so your body can break those down and use that as energy during your workout. So the main thing to look for before a workout in your fueling and your nutrition is sources of carbohydrate. You can see that in this chart, which I stole from this really awesome website, My Sports Science. He makes awesome graphics, but as you get closer to the time of your workout, essentially you need less fuel. You want to eat less fuel. And the size of those meals or the size of that snack needs to be smaller. So let's say you're waking up for a 6 a.m. run. It's likely that you're not going to want to wake up 3 hours before and have a whole big breakfast, right? You probably want your sleep more than that. So it's really important to know when you're going to do your run so that you can plan ahead accordingly and say, okay, I'm going to have some carbohydrate before, but if I only have 15 minutes before my run, I'm going to do something small. For example, I'm going to have half a banana. I'm going to have a couple of dates. I'm going to have a granola bar, half a slice of toast, something small that you're going to have before. Whereas if you have a few hours, and especially for a big push, if you know, for example, you're going to be doing a race, that would be a good time to maybe wake up a little bit early. And so you can get in a bigger meal that's primarily carbohydrate, right? This has some really good ideas for pre-workout fuel: toast, bagels, porridge, cereal, rice, Scotch pancakes, which I'm not sure what Scotch pancakes are, cereal bars, and bananas. So you look at those, and what is the primary macronutrient that's in those? It's going to be carbohydrate. And so that's what you mostly want to be doing, because when you're doing that, it's putting those glycogen stores in your muscles and in your liver for later, for your body to be able to break down and use as energy. Here's some more examples of pre-workout sources of carbs, just everyday things that you might have in your house. high carbohydrate, easily digestible things. All right, so you may have heard all of the buzz about becoming fat adapted. There's some actually high profile athletes out there. Zach Bitter, if you follow him, or he's a big ultra runner. He talks a lot about this. Essentially what that is training your body to be able to use more of that fat that's stored versus the carbohydrate that's stored. And what that can do is, because your body can store so much fat, even someone with 6% body fat is going to have over 100,000 calories of fat that they can burn at any time. So essentially what that is doing is making it so your body's better at burning that fat. So a lot of people will go out and they'll do their runs fasted as a way to train this fat burning system, right? And that is okay, right? There's honestly not a ton of evidence showing that becoming fat adapted has huge benefits for endurance athletes. But if your run is less than 60 minutes, I would say fasting is all right. A couple of caveats to that: if your hormones are out of whack, fasting before your runs can make that problem worse, just because most likely there's an overall energy balance issue where you're not eating enough. Or if you're trying to put on muscle, you're trying to gain weight, then fasting before your runs probably wouldn't be a good idea either. For runs that are over 60 minutes, make sure to fuel beforehand, right? That's kind of the golden rule in sports nutrition. If it's over an hour, try to eat something before, even if it's something that's small, right? So let's say you get up first thing in the morning and you don't feel like eating a big breakfast. That's okay. Eat again, a half a banana, eat a few, a handful of dried fruit, drink some juice, something like that, something very simple. All right, so how to avoid some GI issues. I know myself, I've definitely gone through this where you're out on a run and it's like, oh man, I gotta find a bathroom, or you just feel bloaty. Nobody likes that. And there's a couple of tips to avoid that. One is eat less fiber, fat, and protein before, right before that run. So in that meal before that run, basically those three things are a little bit harder to digest. And so they're just gonna sit in your gut, and that's what can cause some of these GI issues. You wanna allow time for digestion. So like what we're talking about, if you do eat a bigger meal, you wanna allow yourself to digest that. And then staying hydrated is always a good idea. But especially for digestion, it helps things run a lot more smoothly. All right, so we talked about the how to eat before a workout, mostly carbohydrates. And then it totally depends on the timing and how long you're gonna go, about what you should eat and how much. So now let's jump into fueling during exercise. So I told you I was going to talk a little bit about carbohydrate versus fat. I really love this chart, and it's kind of the nerd sciencey part of me. But so on the left side, this is the percentage of fat that your body's using. On the right side, in the blue, you have percentage of carbohydrate. CHO stands for carbs. So at rest, you can see that you're mostly burning, I don't know if you can see my mouse, but you're mostly burning fat at rest, right? But as your VO2 max, so this is your VO2 max, as your VO2 max or exercise intensity increases, you're going to be using less fat, that fat line's going down, and you're going to be using more carbohydrate, right? And so this is why I always stress carbohydrate with my athletes that I work with, is because most of the time, if it's a race or something you really care about, you're going to be in these higher intensity levels, right? And that's not to say you're ever only burning carbohydrate or only burning fat. There's always a little bit of both going on. But you hear about people hitting the wall or bonking, right? Essentially what that is you've been in these high intensities, but your body has burned through all of those glycogen stores that you've stored in your muscles and your liver. And so what does your body do? It has to bump back to this fat, and that's okay. You can use fat, but that slows your pace way down. You need more oxygen to use that fat as fuel. And so you have to slow your pace down. So if you can keep those carbohydrates coming during your workout, then you're going to be able to maintain these high intensity zones. So if you think of like heart rate zones, I know a lot of runners deal in that, like zones like 3 through 5, pretty much you want a lot of carbohydrates going into that. Anything below that, you can go off of fat and that's okay. But pretty much if you want to be pushing it and performing at your highest, trying to optimize, I would definitely suggest carbohydrate. So how much carbohydrate, right? There's kind of this range. And this is another cool chart from that same website. But they essentially, there's this range of about 30 grams to 90 grams. And I've seen even, Kilian Jornet, if you're familiar with him, some of these really, really highly trained athletes, he posted one of his fueling plans a while back, and he had like 120 grams of carbs per hour that he was shooting for during his workout. And that's a lot, right? But for most of us, we want at least 30 grams of carbohydrate per hour during a workout, and up to about 90 grams per hour. This right here that's talking about multiple transportable carbohydrates, what that means is there's different metabolic pathways and different types of carbohydrates or different types of sugars. So fructose and glucose, your body can actually use both of those at the same time through different routes. And so overall, you can get more. And most sport drinks, so you think of stuff like Tailwind or Scratch Labs, they're going to have a mix of those so that your body can get the most out of that. So as intensity and as duration, so let's say you're going out for a 12-hour day, ultra marathon style, you're going to want to be on the higher end of this, right? And that can oftentimes be tricky because that's eating a lot, and people aren't used to eating a lot while they're running, even if it is energy gels or sports drinks, right? And so that may be something that you need to gradually increase during your training to become used to. You hear about athletes training their guts, right? And that's what they're doing, right? Is they're getting used to taking in more carbohydrate during these workouts. So just remember that it's a range, and that there's no I can't look at an athlete and be like, oh, you need this much, right? It's a personalized thing that you kind of need to figure out as you go. These are some examples of carbohydrate during exercise and how many grams of carbohydrate they have. So this is really important as you're getting ready for a run to know roughly how many grams of carbohydrate are in whatever you're eating. So most sport drinks in a serving, so usually the servings are about one soft flask. So like if you think of like your Solomon vest or whatever, one 500 milliliter soft flask is usually going to be around 40 to 100 grams in most of these sport drinks. And for most people, that can actually be sufficient for their run, right? A lot of professional trail runners will only drink sport drinks just because it's so simple, right? Gels and chews, most of those are about 20 to 30 grams each. And then there's prepped food. So I like to make like mashed potatoes and wrap it up in a tortilla or a sandwich. PBJ, there's nothing wrong with that. That has carbohydrate. And obviously there's a pretty big range of how many grams can be in each of those. But they've actually done research putting cyclists through a time trial, and they had them do like potato puree, and they had another group do GU Energy, and they were both able to perform at the same level. So some of these prepped foods, you want to make sure that it's still easily digestible, like those potatoes. Bars, again, usually about 20 to 30 grams of carbohydrate, and then dried fruit, depending on what it is, about 20 to 40 grams. So it can be really helpful to kind of build out a fueling plan when you're headed into a big day in the mountains and say, what am I going to eat every hour? And roughly know I'm going to drink one soft flask of this and eat a gel, or I'm going to have half a soft flask of this, half a soft flask of water, and a bar every hour. So you kind of know, you visualize it out in your mind, and it's not ever going to go exactly how you plan it, and that's okay. But just kind of having a little bit of structure heading into that can be really helpful. So again, what about fat during a workout? So fat is really calorically dense, right? There's a lot of calories in fat. It can be more satiating and palatable than some of these, ultra sugary carbohydrate things that you might have. And so it might be helpful to have a break from those and eat something that's a little more satiating and savory or different. Helpful for events that are several hours or multi-day. So for example, I know Aspire does these runs where they'll run all day, camp, and then run all day. Well, your metabolism is going to be through the roof during those events, right? Because you're just constantly burning. You're even burning when you go to sleep because your body's just trying to repair itself that whole time. So having more sources of fat during the run can be really helpful doing that as well. But if it's an event that's less than 3 hours or so, I wouldn't worry too much about trying to fuel with fat. Your body's usually is going to prefer burning the fat that you already have stored anyway when you're in those lower intensities. So I would focus more on the carbohydrates. All right, that brings us to recovery nutrition, which is super important. So if you think about it, if you're not recovering in between your sessions, so let's say you do a run one day and you wake up and you're ready for your workout the next day and you're still feeling really sore or you're still really inflamed from that workout, then that workout that next day isn't going to be as high of quality, right? You're not going to be able to push it as hard. And therefore your training isn't going to improve as much, or your performance isn't going to improve as much. So if we can shorten that recovery time, and there's a lot of different things that go into that, right? Sleep, rolling out, icing, if you're into icing, whatever it is you do for your recovery, that's really important. But nutrition is a huge piece of that because you need to give your body the nutrients to rebuild and recover. I want to talk a little bit about this, just touch on it, the timing and anabolic window. So essentially, that's theoretically the time that your body will use nutrients to rebuild after a workout. And you'll hear people say, oh, if you don't eat within 20 or 30 minutes of your workout, then, say goodbye to those adaptations, right? And that's kind of the thought that's out there. That's not necessarily true. Honestly, there's not a lot of research showing that it has to be that close to your workout. So if you're not able to get in protein and carbs and antioxidants, which we'll talk about, if you're not able to get that in within that 20 to 30 minutes, don't freak out. It's okay. Just eat as soon as you can. And even if that's within about 2 hours, you should be okay. Your body's still going to use those things to recover and you're going to be all right. Now, most people are pretty hungry after a big day in the mountains. So you're going to want food as soon as you can, right? You want to go hit a restaurant in town or whatever it is you can do to get in those calories that you burned. So for most people, that's not going to be a problem. But just know that if you can't get something in right after your run, that's all right. Just try and do it as soon as is convenient. So there's kind of 3 things that I like to focus on with recovery as far as nutrients go. There's carbohydrate. Carbs are pretty much involved in every step of this process, right? Before, during, and after. And then protein and antioxidants. So let's talk about each of those. So carbohydrate, it helps replenish the glycogen that you've been burning. So all of those carbohydrate that were in your muscles and in your liver that you burned through, that's what you're replenishing when you're eating carbs after your workout. And so that's especially important for back-to-back workouts. So if you're doing something like 2 days or doing something like a stage race where you're running, sleeping, running, you want those a constant flow of carbohydrates so that those stores, I like to think of it like you're filling up the car with gas. Like on a long road trip, you want to just keep it topped off so you're never out in the middle of nowhere and running out of gas, right? It helps with muscle protein synthesis. So essentially that's when your muscles are rebuilding. Everyone thinks about protein, obviously with that, but carbohydrates also play an important role in that. Some good examples of post-run or workout carbohydrate: bread, rice, potatoes, fruit, bars, some of the same sources that we've been talking about, but something that's easily digestible. And so, yeah, so let's jump to protein. And this is the one that everyone knows, right? You have to have protein after a workout. And that's definitely true. I think it gets hyped up a little more than it needs to be sometimes. But protein is definitely important. It is the amino acids that make up the protein are what go in and repair your muscles, right? They're what go in and rebuild those muscles so that you can be even stronger than before. One of these amino acids, and you'll see BCAA on a lot of like protein powders or protein bars. And what that stands for is branched chain amino acids. One of these is called leucine. And it is the one, if you were going to focus on one of the amino acids following your workout, I would focus on leucine. Essentially, it's kind of the ringleader for the other amino acids. It kind of tells them what to do as far as rebuilding. Some really nutrient-dense sources of protein, legumes, soy, nuts and seeds, protein powder, and animal products, right? Meat and dairy. All right, this is the last thing that I like to focus on with recovery nutrition are antioxidants. So a lot of oxidative stress happens when you're working out, essentially because your body's burning through so much fuel. There's some of this oxidative stress, and that can lead to inflammation. It can lead to sore muscles. A little bit of soreness is normal after a workout, right? That's part of the recovery and adaptation process. But if it's lasting for several days, or you feel like your recovery just isn't where you want it to be, antioxidants or foods with antioxidants can be a good thing to add to your recovery nutrition. So these include berries, nuts and seeds, greens, and honestly, pretty much any fruit and veggie is going to be a really good source of antioxidants. So my favorite go-to as far as recovery nutrition goes is a smoothie. It's easy to make. You can put it in a cooler in the car for after a run if you need to. And it's really easy to add those three things to. You can add the carbohydrate, right? You can add fruit in there for carbs. You can even add grains to those if you want. You can put oats in your smoothies. You can even add simple sugars to those if you want. Yeah, of course, you can add protein. You can add protein powders. You can have different types of milk, whether that be plant milks or dairy milks. And then adding antioxidants to smoothies is really easy too. You can add berries, greens. I even like to do a little scoop of turmeric in some of mine when after particularly hard workouts or a long week. I'll do something like turmeric or ginger that can really help with some of that inflammation and swelling. All right, so that is all I had for you guys tonight. If you have any questions, I would love to hear about it. If you want to get more into detail, check out my website, Mountain Sports Nutrition. I do one-on-one coaching where we talk about these things. We also talk about the everyday diet and what you're eating day to day. But I would love to hear from you guys. And yeah, if you have any questions, please let us know.
Yeah, go ahead and drop those in the chat. Oh, I've got a good one here from Dave. I've got couples. We'll get to both of these for sure, but this one from Dave Stinchfield. Dave wants to know, can you talk about salt?
Yeah, so electrolytes is something that we didn't really hit on here. Let me stop my share so I can see these as well. There we go. So the body really likes to keep homeostasis, right? In all things, and electrolytes is one of those, right? And so this balance of sodium in your bloodstream is really important. Basically, your body is going to prefer taking that sodium. This is what it's doing all day, every day, is taking sodium from the food that you're eating, and then you're drinking, and it's mixing those into basically the perfect solution for what your body needs. Now, if someone is a heavy sweater or it's extra hot, it can be beneficial to take either sodium tablets or something like Noon that has more salt in it, or more, it has magnesium, potassium, and all these electrolytes. That can be beneficial. So you can get really official and go to a lab and do like a sweat test and see how much you're actually losing through your sweat. But unless you're sweating a lot or unless it's really hot, it's not necessary to take salt tablets. or worry so much about your sodium intake. We get so much of that in our diet. But it also doesn't hurt. As long as you're drinking with that, it doesn't hurt. So, oh, I see that follow-up question. Is it good or bad idea to see salt in your clothing or hat? So that, I mean, that's normal. If you're a heavy sweater, right, you're going to see that salt as your sweat evaporates. But I would say that you're probably losing a decent amount of salt. And so that would be somewhere where maybe every hour you take a salt tab and you make sure to drink with that. The problem is that you can become hypernatremic or hyponatremic because exactly, there's another question, you can drink too much water. And so drinking to thirst is kind of a generalized plan, but just make sure you're drinking and eating and or taking salt tabs at the same time, not just doing one or the other. Hopefully that helps.
Yeah. Here's a question I have for you, Vic. So you kind of got into that intersection of fat and carbohydrate and VO2 and how bonking happens.
Yeah.
And, you know, if you hit that space, you know, you're out on a big day and you are bonking and maybe you've still got a ways to go. You like see that challenge, like you got to bring yourself back from the edge. Yet sometimes eating can be so hard at that.
Yes.
What recommendations could you make?
Yeah, so that is a really tricky moment, and it kind of goes back to when you're out there all day and you've been doing goos or you've been doing these sugary things all day, and maybe one of the reasons why you're bonking is because those have started to sound like the worst thing in the world to eat. And so every time you go to eat that goo, you're gagging it down. It's like, I don't want to eat anymore until you're not getting those carbs. So that's a great question and really a tricky one to overcome. My main suggestion is I would suggest drinking. A lot of times with the bonk, hydration can be an issue as well. And so making sure that you're fully hydrated first. So if you need to stop and you need to sit down in the shade and drink some water before you start eating again, that can oftentimes kind of restart that mechanism where you feel like you want food again. So drinking first of all, but also trying to get in something that's really simple, right? You want, when you're in the throes of a bonk, you want something that's going to pull you out of that bonk fast, right? So the easier to digest, the better. If you can get a sport drink down, if you can get something like Gatorade or Tailwind or Scratch Labs, if you can even get a few sips of that, that's going to really help pull you out of that bonk. Going along like the range of digestibility, gels and goos would probably be the next easiest thing. But a lot of times people are so sick of those that they need to go to real food. So that's where something like applesauce or something that's more savory, like salted potatoes or chips that you might have, any source of carbohydrate that you can get in is going to help pull you out of that bonk. But just looking for a different source that you haven't been doing all day can be really helpful. So whether that's at an aid station or you take something in your vest or pack that is kind of for that situation.
I've got a question from Kara. She's asking, what about supplementing with iron as a female athlete?
Yeah, so I would definitely get your iron checked before you go and start supplementing. It's a pretty simple blood test. They can go look at your ferritin levels, which is basically how your body stores iron. But if you are a female and you know that iron is an issue, or you have heavy periods, for example, then that is definitely not a bad idea. The recommendations of how much kind of depend on those tests, right? But usually it's between a range of like 8 milligrams to about 30 milligrams a day of supplementation. Try to get that through food as well if you can. So obviously there's heme iron in animal products. There's also lots of non-heme iron in leafy greens, legumes, things like that. So try to get that through your food. Try to make sure that regardless, we all want iron, right? So you're eating those foods with iron that are rich in iron. And then if you feel like there may be a problem, go get checked before you just start taking the supplement.
We got a question over here from Erin Shaw. She says she loves smoothies for recovery, but another nutritionist recommended avoiding antioxidants right after workout. Can you talk to that at all?
Yeah, that's kind of a thing that's like pretty heavily debated within the sports nutrition realm. And obviously I fall in the camp that antioxidants are never a bad thing. The studies that have looked at that have looked at specifically vitamin C supplementation, and the way that your body processes that is slightly different than a food. And so I would argue that the benefits outweigh any costs. Essentially, in that recovery process, there does need to be some of that swelling and inflammation, right? But that's going to happen regardless of whether you're eating antioxidants or not, at least a little bit. So that's kind of my take on it. But you need to make your own decision as far as where you fall in that camp. But I think that especially because those foods are so nutrient dense that we're getting those antioxidants from, it's never a bad idea to have those antioxidants following a workout.
Jennifer just dropped a question. How do OJ and other fruit juices compare to sports drinks in terms of carbs? Which I think is great. I'd love to hear the answer to this one.
Yeah.
So if digestibility and electrolytes aren't an issue, are there other compelling reasons to use sports drinks versus fruit juices?
Yeah, that's a great question. So fruit juice is going to be mostly fructose, and that's definitely a source of carbohydrate that your body can turn into energy. But it tends to be a little tougher on the gut. So a lot of fruit juice several hours in a row, if that's your only source of carb, it can be pretty rough for some people. But if you're mixing fructose and glucose, which is what most sport drinks are, that's going to be a little easier on the gut. Now, I saw another question here, difference between natural sugar and added sugar in processed foods. And this kind of ties into that, right? I would think that, the fruit juice, at least you're getting some, it's probably a little more nutrient dense than some of these sport drinks, right? You're getting some antioxidants, you're getting vitamins and minerals in that. Whereas a sport drink is like basically sugar water, right? And so in your everyday life, I would say that the fruit juice is probably a better way to go. But during exercise, your body is burning through everything so fast that that's not something that I would worry too much about. I work with a lot of athletes who primarily eat whole foods, right? So they really try to limit processed foods in their diet. And that's great. That's great for everyday nutrition. That's, they're not eating junk foods and stuff. But during a workout, essentially the insulin that is going to take care of those carbohydrates, that's going to store the carbs when you eat them, that spike is going to be stunted or blunted when you're exercising, regardless of where the carbs are coming from. So in your everyday life, if you're not exercising, then processed sugars can be an issue because you can get this big insulin spike. Whereas if you're getting sugars through fruit, for example, you're getting all of that fiber and you're not going to have that big insulin spike. But when you're exercising, it's pretty much the same spike regardless of where that sugar is coming from. So I wouldn't worry too much about it. During the week, like during my everyday runs, I usually don't fuel with things like that because of the cost, right? Tailwind is like $30 for a bag or something. And so I just don't want to blow through that. So I use that for like long runs and stuff like that. But don't worry too much about processed versus unprocessed, at least while you're out on a run.
Fairly good follow-up there. And I think it seems like we're kind of like circling around this, like, well, if it's not tailwind, then what? Is fruit juice a good option? What about Gatorade? Any suggestions? I don't know, sports drink, anything like that you like? I'll put one in for noon, like I do like noon.
Yeah. A lot of people like noon.
fairly refreshing, and they've got a bunch of different flavors now. But yeah, anything that you do?
Yeah, I mean, it's totally, you know, personal preference there with the different sport drinks, obviously. But yeah, I think Noon is really good. A lot of people do like Scratch,
Yeah.
Scratch Labs. Mere Energy had one for a little while that I really liked. That was pretty, it was relatively lower in carbohydrate, and so it wasn't so strong. But I liked that one. Just shop around. Try to, I mean, go to your local REI or running store and look at the different flavors. Look and see what they have. The makeup of those is all going to be pretty similar as far as their carbohydrate and electrolyte makeup. But just play around. Try to practice and find something that you like.
Dave Stitchfield in the Q&A saying Spring Energy Pina Colada.
There you go.
Yeah, I'm a big fan as well of grapes. Grapes have just changed my day. Yeah,
That's
in a
money.
way,
Yeah.
very
Yeah.
thirst quenching sometimes.
Yeah.
Jennifer's question here, you maybe have read it by now, but is there a typical amount of daily calories a person should target outside of exercise specific calories? So I guess a baseline, and maybe that's kind of like the nutrition fact standard, but I think it's fairly acknowledged that like that's actually widely variable for different people.
Totally. Yeah, it's very dependent on your activity level and your body type, right? So that can be a tricky one to dial in. It would be important to do maybe a dietary recall, which is something that I do with my athletes. We'll go through and talk about what they ate in a week and see on average how much they're intaking, how much they're burning, and kind of that range that they should probably be in given their goals. But the second part of that question was, how do you know if you're eating enough, or how do you know if you're eating the right amount, right? Well, if you're eating way too much, you're probably going to notice unwanted weight gain, right? If you're eating too little, that can manifest itself in a lot of different ways. One of the primary ways, though, is you're going to feel fatigued. You're going to feel drained either throughout the day or during your workouts. It's going to be a lot easier for you to bonk. You may notice that you're getting injured quite frequently. Lower leg injuries, so stuff like shin splints or stress fractures, that can be a sign that your body's not getting the nutrients that it needs to build up those strong bones. Headaches, nausea, right? There's a lot of different things that can kind of manifest themselves as signs of caloric deficit, but you'll probably notice most likely that you're fatigued. That's probably the biggest sign.
Well, I've got one more question for you, Vic, and that's just what's in your pack. You know, what are you running with?
Yeah. So Tailwind, I love Tailwind. It's worked for me from my very first ultra through today. That's one of my go-tos. So that's kind of my base. I'll usually have one soft flask that's full of Tailwind, and I try to do one of those an hour. And then I'll have another one of water, just straight water. And then I've tried to do races where I just drink Tailwind. And by the end, I'm just like, I need some real food. And so my go-to is those potato wraps. I make mashed potatoes, and just like you can even make instant mashed potatoes and wrap them up in a tortilla. And yeah, it's a little heavier, but it's worth it to have that real food and something savory. I also love Mere Energy has some really good gels that I like. And then Spring Energy is another one that's really easy. That's probably the easiest one for me to get down. It's not very thick at all. And it's pretty whole foody as well. It's made from rice, is kind of the main base, rice and fruit. So those are kind of my go-tos as far as nutrition goes. That's usually what's in my vest.
Have you had the Huma gels?
I haven't, but I've had clients who really, really respond well to that.
Yeah, I've been finding them refreshing lately.
Yeah, yeah.
We've got a question in here about how nutrition works on Aspire trips, which is probably a great segue to kind of move into a little bit of time where we can take some Q&A for Kate. Oh, Jennifer Donahue just throws in one for pickle juice.
Yeah.
Which, I mean, if it's going to be pickle juices, they're also whiskey. And do you have any thoughts on whiskey? Just kidding. How will nutrition work? So yeah, food is a big piece of the Aspire puzzle. We want to send you out well fed and happy. We want to send you out with a pack full of delicious food. And then when you finish your day, we want to put that plate in front of you. That's just totally going to restore. And so from French toast to pasta, burgers, salmon, salads, it's the whole gamut. I don't know if we'll do it this coming week, but last year on Susha, there was some pad thai. We've got some photos that makes me hungry right now. But yeah, so every morning we'll kick off with a full breakfast, including some berries, electrolytes, etc. You will leave fed, and then we set out a kind of wrap and sandwich station, along with a whole slew of nutrition bars, and goos, gels, shot blocks, whatever you want. Truly, we pick up kind of some standards, but if our runners have a specific request, we'll do our best to snag that. We're picking up groceries from oftentimes like relatively remote locations in between camps sometimes, but it's one of those things, like if you love coconut water at the end of your run, like just as you're signing up for a trip or filling out your pre-trip questionnaire, like great time to just shoot an email over to us. We've got just a sheet that we carry in with us for anybody who has food restrictions or has specific diets. We also, will go and pick up, food to make sure that they're fed. And so we kind of keep notes, oh yeah, John wanted coconut water. Cool, got it. So that's the picture. There's often some pretty stellar dessert as well, I would say. Thank you, Dave, for the comment. Dave says we kill it with the food we provide. Yeah, so that's kind of that picture. Vic, got anything else you wanna share? Otherwise, I think we'll move to a period of Q&A with Kate on the kind of topic of the month for the spring training community, and any new questions people might have for Kate. The topic of the month again was common injuries and prevention. And in her blog for the month, she kind of went over iliotibial band syndrome, I think Achilles tendonitis, and there was one more. What was the other one, Kate?
Yeah, just gotta unmute myself here. Yeah. So yeah, we're looking at different tendinopathies, just kind of a real common set of runner-based injuries, in particular, plantar fasciitis and issues around the plantar fascia more broadly in foot mechanics. And then also, we'd be looking at ITB, so iliotibial band syndrome as well. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. So Vic, anything else you want to share before we move on? And thanks so much for the presentation, for asking, for answering questions here. I've definitely got some great takeaways.
muted. There we go. I was muted. Sorry. Yeah, no, thanks so much for having me on, and really good questions, guys. I'm glad that we were able to answer kind of some of your personal questions about nutrition. Obviously, there's so much more that needs to be covered and that we could dive into and talk about. So really, if you are interested, look me up, mountainsportsnutrition.com. And I would love to, go into more depth with you guys if you have more of those questions.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Vic. You're welcome to stay on. I think I already reclaimed host. Or if you gotta go, then yeah, hope to see you on the trail sometime. And I just dropped Kate's blog, Common Injuries and the Power of Prevention, for the spring training series into the chat. If you haven't had a chance to look into that, there's some great info there. And Kate's got a whole series of blogs she's written at this point. So Kate, would you like to kind of just drop in and maybe give a quick summary synopsis of what you share there, and then if anybody's got questions, just drop them in the Q&A.
Yeah. First, thanks, Vic. That was awesome. Yeah, that was a really great addition to kind of how we're profiling running as kind of a multimodal activity, right? So we've got the training plan, which you may or may not be following, the one that we put out with Aspire, but just, considering that training for going long in the mountains is more than just putting in a ton of miles on the trail. So yeah, that was awesome. In regard to the blog post that just dropped this month on common injuries, it kind of builds from the base of the very first article that I posted on gait and biomechanics of running gait. So, what are you doing during your cyclic pattern of running? Because running is a cyclic activity, right? It's just like cycling or swimming, in that you're doing the same general set of movements over and over again in a cyclic or repetitive fashion. So, in a lot of ways, there are a lot of really predictable strain patterns that result when we subject our bodies to repetitive stress. And I always kind of use the analogy of a car. So if you've got a belt that's a little bit out of alignment somewhere in your car, and it keeps rubbing and rubbing and rubbing in a way that's not quite the way it was intended to be used, then it's eventually going to fray or tear or just break altogether. There's a lot of pieces of the body that operate just generally speaking off of that system of really needing to be in alignment to operate and function within the bounds of what is most efficient, and also what is healthiest for you in the regard to your tissue health. And when any of those pieces of the kinetic chain, meaning all the parts of your body that are moving in symphony with each other when you're out on the trail, start to break down or start to compensate for another part of the body that's not doing its job, that's where you'll see some of those predictable wear patterns and injuries start to arise in runners. And I'm really glad that we're talking about injuries in relation to fueling, because like Vic mentioned, that's another piece of it to consider. It's not always as simplistic as just looking at the biomechanics and saying, oh, okay, you have a little bit of genu valgum, or your knee is moving one way or the other. If you've got some sort of issue that's really biomechanically noticeable, then great. We can take a look at that and, kind of troubleshoot on why it's happening, maybe why you've gotten to the point that you're running with what we might call an antalgic gait, which means painful gait, or avoidance of pain, to be more precise. So why are you adapting in the way that you are? But if there's a more recalcitrant issue that is just kind of not really getting better despite you doing all the right things and doing all the right self-care, maybe it's got a background in a nutritional deficit. So just keep that in mind too, that while my world is in biomechanics and exercise physiology, it's never quite as straightforward as just being one thing. But, so a lot of the injuries that we see are generally due to strength imbalances, length tension relationship issues within muscular groups or individual muscular tissues. And then often inappropriate increases in training volume or intensity of training over and over and over again. I see that. We get super excited when summer and trail season rolls around, and maybe we haven't been quite as good as we should have been throughout the winter and keeping up our strength training plans or cross training in a way that's adapted to get back out and running. And that often lands people in a spot of being injured a lot sooner in the season than maybe they anticipated. Yeah. So hopefully that kind of gets at what we're going for. And if people have generalized questions, I do want to throw out the caveat here, and that's in the blog as well. This is just like Vic's presentation. This is generalized information that's applicable to a running community. And then more specifically with common injuries that we may talk about, we're not diagnosing anything here. So just be aware of that. We're not, it's impossible. I can't see all of you guys, so just we're being mindful of scope of practice here. And this is just generalized information, and we're happy to help in the way we can. If you guys do have generalized questions, for sure, throw them our way.
Well, I'm hoping that the absence of questions in the Q&A right now means nobody is injured out there.
That would be awesome. Yeah, that would be a good sign.
Yeah, I mean, so let's say assuming that, Kate, we've got folks here who have been maybe following the training plan of their own, and we're kind of at this point where you've got a lot of accumulative miles on the body at this point, and looking towards some bigger efforts and possibly faster efforts coming up pretty soon. Anything that you would kind of keep in mind as a sort of ancillary to the training plan that could kind of help to keep the body from falling into that, like that prevention piece is kind of what I'm curious about. Anything you want to recommend?
Yeah. So good nutrition, I think first and foremost, honestly, making sure that you're getting sleep, this is a really good intersection of a couple different areas of exercise science. Basically, you've got the physiologic component, which is the training that you're going out and doing and adapting your body, whether that be on a cardiovascular level or that be on, like a mitochondrial and cellular level to the training that you're doing. You're trying to get bigger, stronger, faster, right? But at the same time, if you're looking to longer objectives, or if you're looking at this point to taper for a race or maybe an Aspire trip, the main thing that I tell people is that you want to think about keeping mobility in those tissues. So as you go out and train longer, you're for sure going to be sore. You're testing your body, pushing up against that limit so that you will get an adaptive response. That is what training does. We push into that barrier of discomfort or of feeling like, oh man, I'm just not sure if I can quite finish this run or quite finish this set of intervals. That sort of push up towards that physiologic limit is what elicits the response that we're going for. But with that, however you want to maintain mobility, there's a pretty heated debate right now on whether stretching is useful or if it's just a bunch of bunk, because some people on the no stretching side of the argument are citing research that shows that tissues have a pretty limited response time to stretching. So you may be diligent and go through your set of stretches that last 10 minutes, but how long are those tissues actually remaining in an elongated state for? That's what's not real clear in the science right now. And, I would there isn't a blog post about this very thing. But, I think that there is undoubtedly benefit to maintaining mobility while you're having longer and tougher objectives in mind. So whether that's a stretching regimen that makes you feel good, if that makes you feel good, then, I say to hell with whatever the science nerds are arguing about. If it makes you feel good, then do it. But if you're one of those people like me that's like, oh man, I can't stand stretching, think about what's more dynamic. Like yoga is a really great place to be in this part of the camp, where you're looking at more dynamic activities that's going to keep a balance of maintaining that mobility within your tissues and keeping them happy. But then you're also, you're not overtaxing the tissues either with any sort of like prolonged static stretching, or even prolonged sitting, in positions that we are in a lot of hip flexion, like in the car, sitting right now, like we're all doing. Maintain mobility, get up, make a point of moving around. And I think, that's really the best thing. And it's simple, it's not any sort of glitzy, glammy, super secret sauce to add into your training as you get toward your objective, but it's just a common sense thing. The body likes to be in motion. So, keep yourself moving, and it doesn't have to be moving in the regard that you're going out for a super hard training session. It's more, what can you do to accompany that?
That's great info, Kate. Just keep it moving. Jay, we got 2 questions here, and then I think we'll kind of move into the final phase and talk about the goat rocks a little bit. Michael Brisboy has asked, like, he's heard if you jog a little and then stretch, that's a good idea, or maybe kind of paired with that. If you could talk a little bit about stretching in cold weather versus warm or hot, and if there's any best practices.
Yeah, for sure. Generally speaking, you're going to want to stretch a warm muscle. Cold muscles don't like to have a stretch exerted on them. And that goes for tendons and ligaments. And, you've got connective tissue on a lot of levels. So we generally think and talk just about muscles. But one thing that I think that's important to think about is the rest of the stuff that attaches muscles to where they are in the body. And those are elastic tissues too, right? So you've got fascia that is entering into joint capsules. You've got joint capsules themselves, which have elastic tissue. You've got tendons, you've got ligaments. It's all tissue that can and does stretch to some extent. And there's variation within that dependent upon the level of collagen in the tissue. But generally speaking, stretching a cold tissue is not going to make that tissue happy. And it's going to be less pliable, and it's going to be less responsive to the stress that you're putting on it. So if you want to sit with a hot pack, or if you've got, just a little bit of time, like you said, to add that jog around the block before you get into whatever stretching, yoga, rolling regimen you've got, then for sure do it. Yep.
Kate wrote a great blog, I think last month, titled "Stretching It's Gotten More Complex Since High School." I found it really to be really valuable info. I dropped that in the chat just now. So if anybody wants to get a little more into detail on stretching, just click through there, or it's on the Aspire blog. So Jamie had a question. She asked if you could talk a bit about desired muscle recruitment on elevation. So she's been experimenting with pushing off using calves versus lifting the quads. And because she's fatiguing, sounds like maybe her calves at times.
Yeah, that's a super good and super technical question. Nice. And she's talking about climbing. I didn't quite catch all of that. Is that right?
Yeah, I think on elevation.
Okay.
You can correct us in the Q&A if I'm wrong on that.
Yeah. So the posterior kinetic chain is basically everything on the backside of your body, right? And so when you're ascending, you've got a lot of action on both the anterior, the front, and the posterior chain. But most of us tend to kind of focus on those things that we can feel and identify really easily as far as a muscular group goes. And that often tends to be the calf muscles. Most people, if you ask them to go ahead and contract their glute minimus or glute medius, they'd have probably a hard time locating that real specifically and contracting just that muscular tissue. It's impossible really to do that because all these muscles are working in concert with each other. So I would say that your muscle recruitment is going to be highly variable person to person. The question I would ask is, are you getting pain with ascending? And it sounds like she does have some calf fatigue. And so is that due to a strength issue, or is that actually maybe more due to a mobility issue at the ankle? When you've got mobility, as it should be at the various joints in the body that are providing the action that you're performing. So going uphill, you've got hip flexion, right? The knees in flexion, the toes coming into plantar flexion as you bring your, or dorsiflexion as you bring your foot forward, coming back down into plantar flexion, you're toeing off and then you're pushing behind you, right? That's kind of the whirlwind of action at the joints there. If you have limited motion at any of those joints, it's going to affect the muscle groups that are attached to it. If your calves are continually getting sore, the first place my brain goes is, how's your ankle range of motion? Are you able to dorsiflex to bring your toes up through the bottom, plant those toes and push off again? Or are you having a pretty limited range of motion that's essentially providing a whole lot of extra work for your calf muscles? I couldn't give you, it would be impossible to say specifically your quads should be working 30%, your hip flexors should be working 10%, your calves should be working 50%, that kind of thing. I wouldn't be able to tell you specifically. But I think what you're looking at more is, why are you adapting the way that you are? I know that's a pretty unsatisfying answer probably, but without having you in front of me to kind of take a look at the mechanics, I think that's kind of the first place to go. I would tell her to have somebody or video herself when she's out ascending, and go ahead and take a look at that video, and you might learn a lot. Do it from the front side, back side, and both right and left side. Are you dragging your feet coming through? Are you not actually flexing that hip to bring it up, to plant the leg and push on through? There's a kind of a infinite number of variables that could be going on there.
Thanks, Kate. Great. Well, and that looks like maybe one more in the Q&A. Jamie said, super helpful. Thank you. Cool. Well, then I will go ahead and let's dive into a little detail on the Goat Rocks stage trip. I am really excited to share about this trip. If you're not familiar with the Goat Rocks zone, it is the remnants of an ancient volcano that has blown and now sits in between Rainier and Mount Adams, full of just seemingly endless alpine meadows, incredible wildflowers, some glaciated peaks, some quite literally knife's edge ridgeline that is on the PCT and big enough, maybe you say knife's edge ridgeline, and a lot of trail runners are like, oh, okay, like, do I need a rope? You don't need a rope, but it's the perfect width. Really incredible trail. And so I'll go ahead and share my screen here. And let's see, just making sure I save that. And then this is our track. So for folks that are meeting us by car, we'll meet, I believe, in Packwood for this trip, which is a little ways from the Angry Mountain Trailhead.
Trent, I'm just going to interrupt you here. It looks like your screen isn't sharing.
Is it not? Thank you for Oh, I didn't hit the button. There we go. Thanks, Kate. What would I do without you? How's that? You have it now?
We can see that now.
Great. Appreciate it. So yeah, day one, the Goat Rock stage. So this is a 50-mile stage over 2 days. That starts here on the Angry Mountain Trail, and day one kind of ascends through some forest and up until you reach Angry Mountain, where it then continues out to Hawkeye Point. Hawkeye Point sits above Goat Lake, and you've got effectively some 360-degree views with more than a couple glaciated volcanoes on the horizon. That's maybe one of the things that's so exceptional about the Goat Rocks is just kind of where it sits. So with Rainier just to your west and Adams a bit to the south, and then St. Helens out to the southwest, you're just kind of swimming in volcanoes. So from Hawkeye, then you kind of loop around through the Snowgrass Flats area underneath Goat Lake and drop down. And let me check out this profile here. So we scouted this. This is our first year running this trip. Our crew went out last September to scout it. So I don't have the mileage and profile as memorized as I do for, say, the Wonderland, but it looks like, so day one is 19.49 miles and 7,700 feet of elevation gain, 5,700 feet of elevation lost. So this is a day where we will shuttle you to the trailhead, and then when you finish and come out on the Snowgrass Flats Trail here, we'll actually pick you up and then shuttle runners over to Wallops Lake, which is the beginning of day two, and also a pretty incredible spot. Beautiful lake. We'll be staying at the Wallops Lake Horse Camp, which is just a couple hundred yards down the road from the main campground there, which sets runners up for running straight out of camp for day two. So I'll go ahead and click on this and we'll get the profile. And day two, bigger day, right at 29.52 here on the Cal Topo with 89.30 in elevation gain and 84.58 in elevation loss here. And yes, beautiful day. So on our scouting trip, I had the occasion to run day two and scout this route, and I will tell you, it's some of the best trail running I've done. It's fantastic. So this is the PCT here that you're cruising along after this junction, just north of Sheep Lake. And the PCT past Cispus Basin, and Cispus Pass here is high and remote, and the views to the south and southwest are vast, with Mount St. Helens kind of calling your eye in, and a view really of Mount St. Helens that you get something kind of similar from Adams, but also a remote region, and not a place that not a view I've caught a lot. Really interesting and unique. A lot of good water sources on this first half of the trail after Sheep Lake, and then they start to kind of trickle out as you approach Old Snowy Peak here. Old Snowy is a pretty lovely little scramble. All pretty much class 2, maybe a little class 3, but 4 points of contact, no biggie to be able to just scramble up and get the view from this summit and see some of these permanent snow fields here that are hanging out on the north side of Ives and Bighorn. Before cruising, this is the Knife's Edge ridge line along the PCT. The views are stellar. As you get further north, you have a view back towards the massif that is kind of Johnson Peak with Goat Lake on the backside, before the PCT curves to the east and drops down to Tieton Pass, and then travels through a burn zone here, and then begins to drop effectively along the White Pass ski area. There's a total tease of a ski lift in here. You see it and you think you're close, and you still got a ways, especially on 27-mile legs or so. So not a ton of water. It can be a little bit dry in here along this ridge line, but you're dropping in and finishing at, I think it's called Leech Lake. Very attractive name. But that's right there at White Pass. And the runners will kind of come out of the PCT here and cross the road and then turn, and we'll likely be set up in the horse camp. And that's the conclusion of the trip. At that point, runners will get shuttled back to their cars in Packwood. But we'll be here. We'll likely flag this one. Aspire doesn't do much for flagging our trips. You know, to run an Aspire trip, you need to be able to navigate remote trails pretty confidently. But when we come to kind of busy campgrounds or kind of public intersections, at the beginning or end, really at the end of a day, we'll often kind of flag, put some flagging up to guide people into where we are at a campground. So this might be a case where we'll do some of that. We'll have an aid station set up. We'll have some great food, great eats. Welcome runners in after what's been a pretty big day, with some truly stellar views. And yeah, that's the spread. If anyone has, I'll stop my share here. It looks like I got a couple questions in the chat. There are a couple comments. Yes, PCT does equal the Pacific Crest Trail. And when are the dates for the 2022 Aspire trips posted? Hi, Katie. The dates for the 2022 Aspire trips will, I believe, go live in October, beginning of October, with registration opening up in November. Yeah, so that's the Goat Rocks. Really excited to run this trip on a pretty incredible route for the first time this year. I think a 2-day stage is a really nice kind of intermediate effort between some of our kind of earlier season or some of our rendezvous trips, which are meant to be kind of choose your own adventure style mileage, and something bigger like the Wonderland or the Yosemite trips where we're up in the 90s and 100 miles over 3 or 4 days. So it does look like we've got 2 spots left on the Goat Rocks. You may snag one and run with us. Hope to see you out there. And I guess that's all I got. Vic and Kate, thanks so much for being here tonight. And all of our attendees, thank you as well. And I'll go ahead and sign this thing off.
Thanks, everybody.
Yeah, thanks so much. That was awesome.